Est-ce que vous m'entendez?
Can you hear me? Very good. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to be presenting the roundtable. We are going to be having a different roundtable from the ones you've already seen. We're going to have an exchange. If you've come here to snooze, you've picked the wrong room. There are some QR codes on the side of the room, on the walls there. You can use those and ask questions. We want to have a really dynamic session. We're going to talk about youth. I'm lucky to be invited here because I'm a YouTuber. I do geopolitical videos. I want to make geopolitics accessible to the public at large. And so I have videos on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok, and I make videos at home with experts, or I go out into the field, and I go to the Navy's buildings. I go out to Kazakhstan and talk about diplomacy there, accompanying Macron's posse there. I've got with me 4 people in the room who represent some of the Mediterranean youth. And we're going to be talking together. We're going to talk about several subjects. Let me introduce you to the panel members. We have Nael, who is a second-year student at Sciences Po Paris, specializing in the study of the Middle East and the Mediterranean. Can you tell us a little bit, Nael, about your relationship with the Mediterranean? What anchors you in this wonderful, big region of the world? Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for being here. So I am French, but of Moroccan origin, so I have links with this region. When I was very, very young, I was really drawn to the region and this particular theme, and that encouraged me to go to the Sciences Po campus in Menton, which specializes in the Middle East and the East. So I've been there for 2 years, mainly studying that region, its history, its politics today, its economic situation, its culture. That involves learning the Arabic language, amongst other things. And if everything goes smoothly next year, I would be able to go to Cairo for a university exchange so that I can continue to learn more about the region. So that's all from me now, so far. And next to you, we have Diogo, who's going to be speaking in English. Can I present you in French, but then you can speak in English?
Donc Diogo, tu es doctorant en relations internationales à l'Institut des sciences sociales et politiques de l'Université de Lisbonne, donc au Portugal, et tu fais une thèse qui porte sur le programme spatial chinois. Est-ce que tu peux nous donner un petit peu ton ancrage avec la région méditerranéenne? Je sais que tu as déjà participé à des événements EuroMediterranéens. Est-ce que tu peux nous en parler un petit peu?
So hello.
Hello, everybody.
We have two. So my name is Diogo. Thank you for the presentation. So my links to the Mediterranean came from like 3 years ago when I had the opportunity to represent Portugal in the Mediterranean strategic sessions organized by the FMS. So I was representing the young civilians of Portugal, and since that time my will to know more about the Mediterranean and the strategic studies and all of the things were happening regarding the geopolitics problems and how to have an active role and try to solve some of these problems, or at least make the place a bit better. Since then, I had the opportunity to publish some things about this. And this year, I had the opportunity to organize in Lisbon with Professor Teresa Almeida Silva the sessions with young people from the 5+5 dialogue. So the 5 countries from the European Union and the 5 countries from the North Africa. So that's my basic link to the Mediterranean. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Diogo. À côté de Diogo, nous avons
Next to Diogo, we have Nesreen. You are a second-year student, and you are at the International University of Rabat. Can you tell us a little bit about your relationship with the Mediterranean region? First of all, I would like to thank you very much for moderating this panel, and I'd also like to thank the organizers of this event It's an important event for us youngsters. We are involved today and we will be the decision makers tomorrow. I'm French, Moroccan origins. I've lived all my life in Paris until I went up to Lille to study, but my roots are Moroccan. I decided to go and do a master's at Rabat University so that I could see a completely different point of view from what we have on the northern shore of the Mediterranean. And it really has opened up a lot of horizons for me, and it's opened my mind in many ways. The Mediterranean is a big challenge for French, Moroccan, Spanish youth, all youngsters around the Mediterranean, in fact. And I think we really need some proper dialogue to ensure that this sea, the Mediterranean Sea, becomes a platform for sharing. Thank you very much for those words about your background. And we have Antoine, who holds a master's degree from the Institute of Political Studies in Bordeaux in international affairs, specializing in peace and security. You are also involved in Jeune, IHEDN. Let us know what your link is with the Mediterranean. Well, thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you very much for all of you being here for this final round table. After 2 very intense days, we've learnt a lot. We've had a lot of interesting discussions. So thank you very much to the IFMS for organising this and for now allowing me to take the floor. As for my link with the Mediterranean, I started my studies in 2015. During a wave of terrorist attacks. And it made me stop and think, where does all this come from? And so I investigated the Middle East in my studies, and I had the opportunity to travel for my studies to Israel and to Egypt. And then once you start to peep over the edge, you just have to look further. And so as for my personal links, I don't have any family links from the Mediterranean, but I am really interested in the Mediterranean, and it's been my own personal path. Thank you very much. So before I launched my YouTube channel, well, I took a 9-month trip where I went all around the Mediterranean Sea in 9 months, and I was reporting in each country. That was 2015. It was a very difficult year for everybody, but I couldn't go to Libya. But I did some short reports and articles on a YouTube channel. And so I have that tie with the Mediterranean, although I don't have any family in the Mediterranean either. So don't hesitate with your questions. We're going to start up with our questions. Please do participate. We are only representing a small part of the Mediterranean, far from all viewpoints in the Mediterranean. So don't hesitate to ask your own questions or give your own comments. Let's start to begin with a question of youngsters and how they learn the news, their access to social networks and the media and their problems with fake news. Would you say that youngsters in different countries get their news the same way? Do they have the same hurdles? Do they have the same fears? Do they see things the same? Do they face the same fake news? Who would like to start? It's a free-for-all. Anyone can go for it. Well, based on my own personal experience, and the experience of my fellow students at Sciences Po, who come from all countries around the Mediterranean. On my campus, 60% of people are not French. And so that gives us huge diversity, and it means that there are many, many different cases. However, as far as information is concerned, news is concerned, I think we all around the Mediterranean use social networks to get our updates and find out what's going on. And we must not forget that we do watch television and read newspapers to some extent. But youngsters are not all the same. We're all very different. There are all kinds of profiles, all kinds of elements involved. And that means that on a day-to-day basis, you might open your telephone and we'll see what's in the news. One very recent case for me is what's going on the Gaza Strip. So even to the very minute, you can know what's going on the Gaza Strip. And I've been struck. I've got friends, for example, who are in Gaza, or they're in the Lebanon, or they're in Jerusalem. And they have been in Jerusalem during the 7th of October attack. And so I was getting videos from them of what was going on. And I see live reports on the social media of what's going on. So we constantly know what's going on. And that can trigger a lot of anxiety amongst youngsters, really, because every day we're seeing these negative things and the message is so negative. It was the same when we had COVID as well. And so we are all kind of wallowing in this rather terrible spiral. And that is, of course, fostered by fake news, but we'll perhaps talk about that later on. I'll hand the mic over to one of my colleagues up here. Thank you.
Agree with Nael. So I think speaking, of course, I just can speak for the cases I know. Our generation and the youngest, the smartphone, it's the main source of news and information. Of course, we do watch television, we do go to computer. Some of us do read newspaper, but the smartphone, it's the main source. And we live in a time that it's the young people, it's crucial for them to be connected. Every time we have to be connected. And first of all, we all know that social medias and all these living in the network have a lot of dangers to our mental health, as it's told. And these can trigger a lot of anxiety. Because, for example, let's imagine we have 6 or 7 different news apps on our phone. So since we live in this moment where something that is happening on the Gaza Strip, right now we are bombarded with news about it. We are receiving 7 or 8 notifications at the moment regarding the topic. So these can be really tough for, I'm speaking even for myself during the COVID-19. I was studying the COVID-19 for my master thesis, so I was living for the COVID-19, and I got to the time where I have to disconnect totally from my phone and disconnect the notifications from the news, because it was really messing with my head. So the problem of social networks, and we are seeing that more and more, is that the news, we tend to be real news. It could be biased, but they are mostly real. The social media have a different problem, because everyone can write anything they want and publish anything on social media, most of the cases without any implications or consequences for the person. And that fake news, that I'm pretty sure we are going to speak more soon, can be really nefast and dangerous for the youth, because we are evolving, we are now creating our personalities, and we have our opinions, but for that we need to be critical and judgmental to know if the things we are reading are true or not. And in this case, for example, our moderator have a TikTok channel. I know him from TikTok and YouTube. And it's public service, because you are giving some information that it's facts, and against facts there's no arguments. But in some cases, some other persons don't do the same, and the youth and the adults, of course, they believe in everything they read on Facebook, and they take that as granted and as absolute truths, and in most of the cases it's lies and it's fake news, and that can be really, really bad.
Donc, moi,
Yeah, I want to talk about the advantages. Yes, we all know about the dangers of using social networks too much. The main danger would be getting fake news, manipulation, but also a dampening of our own critical capacities. I think you've all got Twitter, and you see that there is no regulation, and so you can see hate messages in there, which are not good for youngsters, because we're supposed to be listening and not judging, as people seem to be doing on Twitter. Now, for the advantages, I think the social networks enable us to be up to date. We're very curious. We can be open-minded, and we can respect different cultures. And these same social networks can also bring down our preconceptions about foreign cultures, for example, and our wrong conceptions about how people live in other parts of the world. Thanks to this, we will then be able to have a real dialogue and true cooperation that will be able to help us sort out all of the different challenges we face. Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said so far by the other panel members. So I'm going to try not to repeat what they have said. One point I would like to pick out is that capacity to be critical in your judgment. With social networks, we see a lot of pictures, videos, lots of images. And I think these different media make it difficult for us to take that step back and think about things in the longer term, think about things which happen to us, events in the news, etc. I really do think it's important to vary our sources of information. The advantages have already been listed. Our curiosity is piqued when we see these pictures, and that's a good thing. For the youngsters, for example, it's good to be curious about things, but I think you have to spend time reading as well. Read the news, read older things, historical things, really. Take a look at books. Let's not forget books. Today we get the feeling that the youngsters all are on TikTok the whole time, all on social networks the whole time, and only that. But I think that's too much a generalization. Youngsters do get information in a very enlightened way on many topics. And from a personal point of view, I'm here because I represent the young IHEDN, and I'm in charge of the Committee for the Middle East and the Arab world. And we have a press review, and we try to find out, to cross references, to deal with news with that little bit more perspective. So in short, we note that youngsters are connected on the north and the south banks of the Mediterranean, and they face similar problems, not necessarily of access to news, but how you can sift through all of the sources that you're receiving every second, the impact that can have on your mental health. And I see that in my job as a YouTuber. There are some people who decide not to publish content on TikTok because TikTok can contain content which is a bit misleading. I say, on the other hand, it's better to be out there, to occupy space and put the right information up there, as the newspaper Le Monde does. It's got a great TikTok channel. And another strong factor is that we have to give youngsters the tools that they've never had so far, tools to develop their sense of critique. There are many ways to mislead people on social networks. Some people are misleading you because they want you to go onto a page, and because you're on that page, they will earn money because there is advertising on that page. There are other people who are political militants who want to ensure that you think that their point of view is the best one, and there are other content. There is other content which is generated to nurture doubt and to create chaos. So there really is a hierarchy, if you like, of misleading or untrue or fake news when you're on the networks. Are there any questions to begin with in the room about social networks? Yes. We'll have to wait for a microphone, otherwise there will be no translation. No translation without the microphone. The interpreter repeats, there is no translation if the question is not spoken into a microphone. The interpreter does not hear what is being said without the microphone. Thank you for your question. Anyone like to answer that? Yes, thank you for the question. As you have pointed out, there is an elite, although I don't really like the word, between the students who I mix with at Sciences Po and my friends from high school, for example. Yes, there is a big gap. I was at a very working class high school, very simple life, very modest background. And so when I speak with those people, yes, of course, it's very, very different. But I think we do have the same approach towards our social networks because social networks are part and parcel of our lives. And we all use them. I don't think your level of education is all determining. We all know how to use social networks. But yes, there can be some differences in terms of your ability to judge. And from my point of view, in terms of Israel and Palestine, we study that every day. We have some friends who might be studying medicine, for example. They won't have the same opinion as us who study these subjects the whole time. That might be where the difference lies. I don't know if anyone else would like to add anything to that. No, I don't agree with that. I think your education does play a big role. It makes a big difference if you are fortunate enough to have done higher studies, to have traveled around a lot, to be curious. I think there really can be an enormous difference. There are a lot of youngsters who stay where they grew up, don't really travel very much, and they will have a different take on the news. They will have different sources, and that means that the role of your peers, those around you, is much more important when you have less opportunity to go and make your own opinion and have your own critical thinking. Social networks are full of publications that are well written, full of facts, etc. If you haven't been to university, for example, you may just be watching the posts by your friends, i.e. who are not professionals or experts. So I think that will have a big impact. And that could be a big difference between the south and north banks of the Mediterranean, depending on how much education you've had. Yeah, I agree that sadly, there is a big difference in ability to digest the information that we are given, depending on how far your education has gone. Those people who were not born with internet may not realize it, but these are very visual platforms. There are images, there are photos, there are texts, but the way that texts are written, it's to kind of to tell you how important the pictures are. I try to spend time going on channels and reading comments of non-stop news channels to see how the man on the street will perceive these articles. What kind of prejudices can the man on the street have? What is the impact of this way of presenting the news? How can I understand their point of view so that I can then include them in the content of my future tutorials? So there is a different way you broach the subject depending on how much a perspective you might have. But that, sadly, is missing in France. I'm not sure about other countries, but in France, at the baccalaureate at high school, there is a subject which is called geopolitics, and a lot of that concentrates on news and fake news. It's a tiny kind of module, but it's a good start. So some change is happening now. So what we really need to do now is, from a very young age, is teach youngsters how to look at media and social networks with a critical eye. And this is something which we don't really have yet. There are some questions about the media here. Let's continue talking about Mediterranean youth. The first question there, do Mediterranean youngsters share the same values? Well, we'll be able to broach that in our second subject. If there's a subject you want to spend more time on, don't hesitate. We'll come back to that later. But now, I listened to the conference this morning on the Mediterranean and the Middle East. We are increasingly talking about the global south, which is a term which is bandied about. But the global south could stand as an opposite to the Western view. In your opinion, in the Mediterranean, are the youngsters a bit frustrated by the way that Europeans take a stance against the rest of the world? The change that we see in international relations between different parties, are youngsters noticing this, and is this bringing youngsters together, or does it make them take opposite stands? Well, I'm going to focus on my own experience, the youngsters in France and Morocco. Of course, I am not the spokesperson of Moroccan youngsters. I am in contact with Moroccan youngsters and have been for about 2 years because I've been studying there. But I'm going to tell you about the discussions that I've had with Moroccan youngsters from my point of view. I don't think the West is being rejected by youngsters in Morocco. But if you talk to someone from the Sahel, you might get a different answer. In Morocco, I would say there's some bitterness, which is expressed by this diplomatic crisis between Morocco and France, with fewer visas being issued. As a young student who wants to go and study abroad, or if you want to travel as a youngster, then you can feel very bitter about that. And you may not understand this friction between the two shores of the Mediterranean. And in my eyes, this is the real problem that exists between Moroccan youngsters and France. However, recently an ambassador was sent to Paris, and another one went to Rabat, and the King of Morocco saw the ambassador, and the situation is looking better. So as a Franco-Moroccan female, I think that relations between France and Morocco have to be close. They have to be friendly relations. Because we've got a shared history and we face the same challenges. And that means we must cooperate, and we must be on a level footing, and we must not suffer from neo-colonialism, because we're also having that debate in Morocco as well. A lot of students are talking about France's interventions in Africa, and they think it's a bit like a colonialism. So let's shed that burden, and let's start to cooperate. And this is a mindset which has to spread throughout the whole of the Mediterranean. I've talked about France and Morocco because that's my personal experience, but this is a mindset which should be present absolutely everywhere. Can I just weave a question into this? Which Western values do Mediterranean youngsters find hard to embrace? So that echoes that main theme which I have introduced. Perhaps you'd like to answer that.
I just wanted to add one thing about what has just been explained. There's also an impact today that is felt by young people around the Mediterranean, especially on the southern shores. A lot of people complain about a kind of European discourse which is very centered on Europe and which tends to promote our system and our democracies as being perfection. Should be the objective for every country, and we know that this doesn't work. We can't export our model around the world. This was the case with the failure in Iraq, for example. So a lot of people today talk about this problem, about this discourse in which Europe is presented as being the perfect model to follow. This is something that is criticized by some of the students I had an opportunity to talk to. The problem is that we have a lot of people today who continue to have this vision of Europe being the perfect model to achieve. I even heard it during these past 2 days here, and I don't think it's a good thing to be able to bring people together. We need to speak to each other on an equal footing and not have relations that are based on one person having a perfect model that has to be achieved by others, because if that's the case, then we will never be able to bring the two shores of the Mediterranean together. This comes back to the question of visas, really. The policy that has been conducted for visas over the last few years is a real barrier, I think, to prevent the young people coming together, because we have projects that are hindered because of this policy. Students and young people are unable to come into France and to Europe for their projects. These are students who do not pose any problem at all. I know people whose visa request has been accepted for studies in France in very prestigious universities, but were unable to come here because of their visa had been rejected, even though they're only students. So they had a place for studying in France, but their visa request was rejected. So this is something that needs to be resolved, I think. To try to react to the question of values from the point of view of young people, I'd like to take two examples that are a bit contradictory. The first value I think is interesting is the value of freedom. This is a value which brings together all of the young people around the Mediterranean. These are slogans that we heard in all of the popular movements in the Arab world, whether in Algeria, Lebanon, Iraq, during the Arab Springs in 2011. This is a very important value for European youth as well. It really constitutes our political identity. And there's a mirror to this value which brings all of us together. From a very French point of view, I think the value of secularity is not, and the way we understand secularity is not at all a unifying or unified value in all societies in general or in amongst young people. I'm thinking particularly of the southern shores of the Mediterranean. There are many different dimensions. There is a lot of baggage and a lot of history, which isn't the same in the different countries in the Arab Muslim world and in France. And there's a whole way that we conceive of secularity and laicity is presented in the media, in the Arab language or in English to these people. And often there are problems really with translating, which means there's a lack of understanding, and this can create resentment and anger and the kind of hatred between societies, which isn't really justified. And this hatred can be used by some people, particularly when talking about secularity. Afraid I can't translate what the person is saying because they don't have a microphone. I'm very sorry. The interpreter is speaking here. Can't translate because there's no microphone being used. It's the contrary thing that happens. What I'm interested in is to know whether there are other values that Western societies highlight, thinking it is positive, whereas in fact it's counterproductive.
Merci beaucoup pour votre intervention.
Thank you for your presentation. I was speaking about these political science students I've been able to meet. I think that the values that divide us also are linked to the new social struggles that are emerging in France and in the West concerning women's rights or LGBT issues, because quite simply we could say that we don't have the same priorities really on the southern and northern shores. When I talk to Lebanese students or Moroccan students, their priority is not really those questions, because they are more concerned with instability and wars that can affect these countries, more important issues for them. And so I know that often people are not really interested in these subjects because they feel that it's not a priority and that we shouldn't impose these themes everywhere. This comes back to what I was saying earlier about imposing a model or a template which should be applied to the whole world. These European values are not universal, and this is the case for secularity or democracy. And so when we think about these new struggles and new combats that may in a few years also emerge, we also must, of course, strive to improve women's rights and LGBT rights. But I know that it's often not a priority because there are other struggles which are more vital and fundamental. With the microphone, please, otherwise I cannot translate. Can you give the gentleman a microphone, please, somebody? Otherwise I cannot translate. I just wanted to react to what the gentleman was saying. These struggles are present in the southern shore countries. The LGBT cause is something else, but for emancipation of women in Morocco, there's a real determination to achieve women's liberation. His Majesty the King is in the process of reforming the family legislation to enable women to be emancipated. I think that the feminist cause is present in the southern countries. What I would like to say is that the real problem, the misunderstanding, is to do with secularity and laicity. Sometimes people come to see me and they say, is France an Islamophobic country because of the laws on the Islamic headscarf? Nobody's ever come to see me criticizing the choices of France in terms of feminism or LGBT. These things are not called into question at all. It's the laicity or secularity which is promoted by France. If France is called into question in southern countries who see this as hostile to Islam rather than secularity, because they have not grown up in an environment which is secular, where in a secular state. With the microphone, please, otherwise I cannot translate. I don't get the impression that France or the West overall wants to impose the value of secularity. We have to recognize that it does try to export democracy and a kind of mercantilist approach. Because we're talking about the secularity for the last few minutes, this is really very much a French conception, which doesn't really exist in the United Kingdom or in other countries around us, or at least not to the same extent as it does in France. Is this something that also is taken into account to say that it's very much a French characteristic? It's not something that really everybody wants to export to other countries from the West. The basic question is, what are the values that separate us? We haven't talked about a desire by France to impose secularity in the southern countries. It's just a question of what are the values that can separate French youth and Moroccan youth. And of course, France doesn't want to impose secularity in Morocco or Algeria or Tunisia or anywhere. But when you talk about values that separate us, I really do think that secularity is one of these values, because there's a lack of understanding. People don't really understand this concept. Often I'm asked questions about this. People say, how do you manage to live in France? How can you feel French? After all the debates we see on the TV about all the Islamophobic things that people say on television. I'm not talking about the heads of government, but I'm just talking about French public opinion. During these debates and public debates and discussions, often they have they say things that are Islamophobic against Islam, and so we have young people in the south and in Morocco who don't really understand this. That's what I wanted really to highlight. Before I hand over to Diogo, I wanted to say something about how I feel personally via my YouTube channel, I had an opportunity to talk about these subjects, particularly in the Sahel countries, talking to President Mohamed Bazoum, and in the comments that sometimes arrive in waves, and we know that often we wake up one morning and say 70 warnings of comments, and people have shared comments in a particular country about something they've seen because of the profile, and we see the profiles of the people who have responded. What I think France is criticized for is its posture. Perhaps not seeing all of the countries as fully fledged partners, which full respect for sovereignty and to act as full partners is a problem for some young people. So the problem is that France is felt to say to young people, this is what you should be adopting, this is a universal value. I'm thinking of some of the videos I shot about the relationship between NATO and Russia. The America is criticized for the same thing because they want to put their interests to impose their interests and present them as being universal values. I know how your country speaks to mine. I know, and I can see this discussion and the conversation doesn't really take place on an equal footing, and I know this is something that can have an impact on young people. I think what happens very often, to come back to what was just being said earlier, if you're talking about the young people in the southern countries, or in Morocco particularly, there's a big difference between what young people think when they come from a wealthy background and people from a more underprivileged background. I was in a French lycée, high school in Morocco, and the values that have been mentioned concerning women's rights, etc., these are values that are really shared and adopted by most of my people in that kind of school I was at. But if you talk to people in more underprivileged area, they're much more conservative, and they're much more, religion is much more important to them. And so then you'll have a lot of young people who will be against these values. So there's a big difference within the Moroccan youth itself.
Now I would like to bring because we are discussing the cooperation between the North and the South, I would like to bring to the table a huge elephant we have that can really change the way we cooperate and the future of the cooperation. And that elephant, besides Russia, it's China. Because we are here talking about the shared values, or the values we have different. And right now we are, and it's my opinion, of course, we are watching to the decline of the Western, or so-called Western values, and we are watching every day that pass an alternative, I would not say totally new world order, but an alternative world order where China is offering to most of the countries in the world, and of course in European Union too, because Belt and Road Initiative arrived in Italy and in Greece, but we have European regulations, so it's kind of different the way we can do business. But speaking with some friends I had in different African countries, the image that right now they have from the Chinese are really different, because we are talking about two totally different ways of cooperation and aid. From one side, we were talking about the way that, for example, the West help the other countries, or the way we negotiate. And in the other side, we were talking about China, who tend to do all the business and cooperation following the 5 principles of Pacific coexistence. So the approach, it's not totally top-down as the European Union did in the past, and it went really bad. So I agree with my friends that the European values can't be used to watch or explain phenomena all over the world, and in this case it doesn't just apply to the North Africa or the Middle East, but all of the rest of the world. And this Chinese model of cooperation, because if we look, that's an exercise I usually do when I'm on conferences. It's a world map starting on 1995 until 2019, and it shows who is the biggest trade partner of the countries in the world. So we have blue for United States, and we have pink for China. And we start with a map all blue, and then when we start to the last year or 2 years ago, besides the so-called West, as I'm saying, European Union and United States and Canada, and even that some of that countries are not that blue right now as they were. The rest of the world, it's all pink. And why is that? Because in most of the cases, the countries need help, and China go there, and they don't impose the help with reforms, with institutional reforms, with political reforms, and in some cases that's good for the countries. In some cases, it's not really good, and we saw cases that it's not working well. But bringing back to what I was saying, my colleagues in some of these countries where China is investing a lot, they have now a really different image from the West based on all the narratives that China could impose in that countries. And that is a total game changer for the way we can cooperate from the North Basin, the north part of the Mediterranean, and the south part. So I think we need to find a way, because as my colleague said, we do cooperate, but sometimes in the Mediterranean we don't dialogue, we just cooperate. And if we dialogue more, we can do better cooperation, because in most of the cases we have the same problems with different perspectives, with different values, but the way ahead is to cooperate. And if we have interference in this cooperation, it can change everything. So if it's the will of both sides, we have to adjust, we have to cooperate in different ways, and we have to open the channels of dialogue. We can't close them, because if we do close them, we are going to keep having the visa problems, we are going to keep having the proxy war problems, and all of the other problems we have in the cooperation of the Mediterranean. That is going to be bad for both sides. So that's it.
Pour revenir sur la question des visas.
Turn back to the question of visas, we should have had a Moroccan student on the panel whose visa had been rejected, even though she had been invited to participate in the roundtable to illustrate this subject. I've seen two questions that can correspond to this major theme. Before we move on to the next one, we've talked a great deal about what could potentially divide the young people on the two shores of the Mediterranean, but I can no longer see it. Is there a Mediterranean culture that brings these two shores of the Mediterranean together? And what are these elements that bring the two shores of the Mediterranean together, perhaps, if any? This is a huge question. I think there are a lot of things that bring young people together on the two shores or the Mediterranean, or all shores of the Mediterranean, young people right around the world, in fact, outside the Mediterranean region. I think over the last 30, 40 years of globalization, we can see the impact of this globalization. We are all the results of this globalization, in a way, even though we can see that this is perhaps now changing in its approach. Maybe a few examples would be useful. If we look at culture with its literature, films, music, all these things circulate much more easily now between the different countries and different regions of the world than before. This is something I've observed and I see every day in my daily life. If we just look at the example of food, young people today, especially European young people, love to eat different types of Mediterranean cuisine in restaurants. It doesn't have a huge strategy or anything like that, but it's also the way young people feel. I think it's important. I'd like to add something also about this common culture that we have. When I talk to students, I often notice that there is a kind of a feeling of belonging to this Mediterranean basin, with history that is very much linked. You can't see the Mediterranean as a border, but more as a space where peoples have always exchanged. It's been an area of interfacing between peoples. So we have this a lot of common cultural aspects between all of the countries around the Mediterranean. A lot of young people I know and students I know say that they are above all Mediterranean, whether Italian or Greek or Cypriot. We all have common values and customs. And when it comes to principles, people have often explained to me the importance of the family. This is true for the whole world, of course, but this is something that does often come up with this desire to share common characteristics together. And this is true. You mentioned food earlier. This is important. It's true. It's a real common identity and a lot of links between these countries, but we shouldn't talk in terms of the too general, because it's a huge region with very different peoples and cultures, which are often in conflict with each other. And of course, all this has to be taken with a pinch of salt, really. I don't know if anybody else wants to add anything. Well, are there any questions connected to what you were saying, or perhaps is there a desire by young people to take action by means of transnational movements to change public opinion on certain subjects? So do you know of any movements of this kind, transnational movements, to change public opinion on certain subjects? Yes, concerning the grouping together of Mediterranean youth, I can give you the example of a friend of mine who left this week to participate in a Union for the Mediterranean program in Barcelona, which brought together at least 30 nationalities from around the Mediterranean. There are more and more of these programs are being set up to bring together Mediterranean youth. I wanted to react to another point, which was that we can often get along with anybody from anywhere around the world. The only problems that stop us, in fact, from coming together are the ideas we have right in very deep within us, which we need to reconstruct. Because through my travels abroad, I studied in Istanbul. I went to Spain for 2 months this year, where I met many different nationalities. In fact, we're all young, and we are all human beings, and we're all ambitious. And if we don't deconstruct these ideas, we'll never really be able to have a real dialogue. For me, Mediterranean youth can come together, but worldwide youth can come together as well. I have a question. It's more of a use case that you might be like to comment on. In Gaza, 50% of the population is aged under 18. Do you think that the solution to this problem that adults aren't able to solve could be solved by youth? Great question. I think we could talk about it for 3 hours, or 3 days even. It's a very interesting point. Quite sincerely, I don't think that young people today have any concrete power in Gaza. A lot of them are in complete despair because they can't see any future. Today, this is why we are seeing radicalization of political movements and young people. I've been able to talk to some specialists who have told me that in Hamas, a lot of young people have no hope and can see no future because within these walls there's no possible future for them. There's no university exchange program, or, as you all know, it's more like an open-air prison. For me, the lives of these young people have been broken and censored, and they really don't have any possibility to express themselves. There's no possible opening for them. I think, unfortunately, to solve these problems, the solutions have to come above. When I say above, I mean the governments and power relations between the different countries and states, because we know this is a conflict which, in my opinion, is more of a regional conflict and an international conflict because of the complexity of the situation and the different actors that are involved. I think that change can only really come from above. It's just my personal feeling. I don't know what others might think. I'll hand over to you. I don't have the answer either, but what I can say is that young people are much better informed and are informed much more quickly than before, and they see a lot of much more trash than they used to. There's a lot of censorship on social networks. A lot of people specialized in moderating the content on social networks. That's one of the worst jobs in the world, I think. And there are things on Telegram and on Twitter that people can see. Nevertheless, I think young generations get the information very quickly, but as to whether it's actually going to make any difference and is it going to cause them to put pressure on organizations, I really can't say. But in my job, what I can say is I can see that information is being transmitted at an incredible speed. That might be a positive thing in some respects, but I have to say I don't really have the, not able to take an objective point of view of that. Perhaps I think where there's a big difference between southern and northern shores of the Mediterranean is the importance of the youth in society. In France, we only represent a small part of the society on the other shores of the Mediterranean. As you said, 50% of people are aged under 18 in Gaza, and this is the case in many other countries in the Arab world. The youth represents a huge proportion of the total population. This isn't the case in France. So I think in the Arab world there is an important role to be played by the youth in the Arab countries to express something, not necessarily to take action, because as Nael was saying, this takes place at the level of governments, and with a conflict like this, it hasn't been solved for 70 years, and there are good reasons for this. This means there are very difficult issues to be solved. And one last point, I spent a few months in Israel as part of a university exchange recently. It's also interesting to see how Israeli youth are going to position themselves in relation to this conflict, because the key to solving this conflict is perhaps a little bit in the international community and amongst Palestinians, but above all amongst the Israelis themselves. And I think that there are some changes taking place in Israeli society which are tearing it apart in many different directions. A lot of Israeli youth today, because of the population trends, they have a very conservative mode of life, a very conservative and orthodox, particularly in the colonies. They're very loud, and we hear them a lot, and they're very influential on the political level. But there's also lots of other young people who are more open to the rest of the world and who and are very much against the constitutional reforms that are being proposed in Israeli, and are against those. We're going to hear a lot about those young people as well. This is something that is developing more and more in the Israeli society. There's a complete rejection of the last 30 years of policy that is being implemented over the last 30 years by politicians, and this is something perhaps is a source of hope for us young people in Europe. We don't really have much, don't have much power to have an influence on this conflict. I'd just like to one thing that I've observed, which I think is very interesting, which is to come back to the weight of the young Arab people, not only in Gaza, but in other Arab countries. And here I think they have a real role to play. 2 weeks ago, I was in Morocco, I was in Tangier, and by chance, I happened to see an article about Palestine. And there was a demonstration with a lot of young people participating in this demonstration. They were calling into question the decisions made by the government on a political level in Morocco, which is quite rare. And I think that if all of the Arab youth were to be mobilized and would start criticizing the decisions of their governments, for example, who have normalized relations with Israel, that could cause a complete upheaval of the situation and a complete change, because Moroccan youth really don't support Israel, even though the government has good relations with Israel. So I think it's... So the government, as for the young people in Gaza, they really can't have much opportunity to have an impact on the situation.
I've got a question. I think that in our planet, 50% of the population is male, 50% female. When you're talking about secularism, do you know that secularism was the English at the end of the 17th century? They talked about it first. There was a king of England, and they call that an indulgence, to have the freedom to think on your own. And so secularism, as we see it here in France, dates to 1905. That was when there was a separation between public life from religion. One might think, therefore, that religion is preventing us from thinking freely. You might think that. What I can't grasp is what Nael was saying earlier on, whereby the priority in Mediterranean Muslim countries is not equality between men and women. I think that's horrendous. And I'm saying that because in life, we all have our own truth. And when you think about it, is truth really reality? And I work for the Navy. I'm a migrant. I am the grandson of a migrant who came from Algeria. I've served France for many, many years now. And in my job, we have to be very humble, because if we do things wrong, we blow people up, which is terrible. And so I echo what Nazreen said quite a lot. But I want to make sure that secularism is you. And I echo what the woman said earlier on. You're all of a certain culture, you're very cultured, you're educated, you can filter the news, and that's what's important. In the social networks, I used to be editor-in-chief of a magazine, and I was really careful before I would publish articles, and I would filter things because I realized that there was a lot of fake news, it has become a weapon, in fact. Social networks are now a weapon for autocratic countries. If you take a look at democracy, when you send something out, it's simply to denounce fake news. But we are not sending out fake news, or we don't do it intentionally. What is horrible is, and this is where I am in agreement with you when you're saying about Le Monde, the newspaper, Le Monde newspaper, contains a bit of everything, and I have subscriptions to several newspapers because I like reading the journalists' opinion, whether they're from Lebanon, Algeria, who cannot publish in their own countries, but they can publish elsewhere. And as a former sailor, I have sailed many countries. I went to Egypt for a couple of months, and I discovered that all in all, whether you're Catholic, Protestant, Muslim, or Hindu, at the end of the day, we all have the same feelings. We all want to have a balanced family life. We all want to have children, grandchildren. We want to be happy. And above and beyond that, I note that man is not always moderate. We've mentioned testosterone already. My wife sometimes says to me, get a grip, man. And I say, well, I haven't been out to play rugby today. I've got excess energy that I need to expend. In politics, I love to see women giving their opinion. And this morning we had the great fortune of having a Euro MP, Nathalie Loiseau, who dazzled me. She's got a lot of experience, she's got great training, and she goes out to China to learn Mandarin. So my question is simple. In your training, do you study philosophy? Because philosophy is the basis of everything. It's the cornerstone of everything else. The interpreter can no longer hear what is said without the microphone. Yes, perhaps I was very clear about women's rights. Yes, I do share your point of view, but as we heard earlier on, there is a difference between the elite in a country and the middle classes and the underprivileged classes. That is the difference I wanted to underline. I did not say that it was not important that we should just brush that to the side. No, the only difference is that this feeling is not a priority for all populations. Hence my point. Yeah, I think Nesri wanted to say something, so I will be very, very brief. Just to round up what Nael has said, I believe that women in the Arab Muslim world want to be freed, but also governments want to push women to work. For example, we see in the Gulf, women's employment levels are really going up. They are being emancipated thanks to their education and thanks to work. I think we are ill-perceiving things, just because things aren't the same as they are in our countries, because there are differences in values. But women are being emancipated, and that is inherent in that part of the world now. Nasreen, did you want to add something? Well, just to echo what Antoine is saying, so if you want to move on, that's fine by me. There are other questions. Well, I don't think we can say it's not a priority for the southern countries to enhance equality between men and women. There are many programs in place to highlight the role of women in Morocco. Personally, I have seen many things happening in my university. There are all kinds of women professors. There are a lot of female students. And there is a real commitment to leave sexism behind us. It has been part of culture, we cannot deny that, but we want to leave it behind us now. Moroccan culture, I feel uncomfortable saying it like this, but it can be sexist, but we are trying to leave that behind us. And to say it's not a priority, it's not true. Fighting for social rights means fighting for women's rights. They go hand in hand. Thank you very much for those questions and answers. Does globalization of culture, soft power of the United States, mean that today's youngsters are looking for strong values such as extremism? An example here. I think with what TikTok has really brought, which I could not see in YouTube or even on Instagram, what TikTok brings to the table is make a way to stake a claim to culture. We have all indigenous tribes who are having millions of views on their cultures and tribes. There are populations in Greenland have millions of views talking about their culture and traditions and their roots. Central Asia, same thing. So we are in a form of standing up for differences in culture, values, and I'm convinced that youngsters are more familiar with how the world perceives its own cultures, and there is a better respect for other people's cultures now. But as for toppling into extremism, well, I really wouldn't like to say that, but on TikTok we do have phenomena which are appearing and very regularly. We're not going to have time to talk about all of the questions, but I just wanted to encourage our exchange. We've got 10 minutes left now. So let's move on to another question. We've talked about secularism, religion. Let's talk about another sensitive subject, migration. Immigration. All Mediterranean countries are concerned, and they all talk about it, but not through the same lens, not with the same commitment and desires. So I think it depends on whether you're in a destination country. All countries are transit, departure, and destination countries to differing degrees. So we could talk about Morocco here, which was a traditionally transit country, but now is becoming a destination country. So how do youngsters around the Mediterranean perceive the question of migration? What are the different points of view we might meet? Morocco is facing a very complex situation on two counts. It is a country of transition, of transit, and it also is a destination country. We have migrants coming from the Sahel who are coming to Morocco. I don't mean to ignore migration from Africa into Europe. That still exists. But the criticism which I would make is that the real problem are the deaths in the Mediterranean Sea. We are seeing land borders being shored up, but that's not stopping migration because new routes are being opened to the Canary Islands, for example. And there's another piece of criticism here. By using terms such as security challenges and waves of migrants, we are dehumanizing the migrants. In the end of the day, they are just youngsters like we are who dream of having a better life. The main challenge in my eyes for Africa is to offer youngsters an opportunity to have a future in Africa so that they don't have to risk their lives and go seeking a better future which may never come to fruition in Europe. I can add something also, which has been shared a lot by my fellow students at Sciences Po. There's a lot of solidarity in Europe between countries. When I discuss with Italians, Greeks, and Spaniards, we realize that those countries in particular are suffering from, I hate to use the term, waves of migrants. That's less the case for Northern Europe. So there is a big difference between countries in the north and the south of Europe, and that triggers quite difficult emotions. I don't know if all peoples around the Mediterranean feel solidarity. From my point of view, for European countries, we have that solidarity, but that's because we are not experiencing such acute conditions as other countries. Let's take a look at the Lebanon, for example. There are Syrian refugees in the Lebanon, and it is estimated that a quarter of the population of Lebanon are Syrian refugees. So it is understandable. Perhaps there's a lack of solidarity there, but for example, I am based in Menton at the border with Italy, and every day I see migrants, I see what happens, I see what the police does, and I see the migrants trying to cross the railway tracks, which is a very, very tricky situation. And we do see what's going on a day-to-day basis.
Regarding this question of migrations, I totally agree with what was said already, and I really agree with my colleague. We can't dehumanize it because they are people like us, because we can be different, we can have different values, but in the end of the day, as that sir said, we just want to have a happy family, we just want to create our family, have our life, so it's the same. And as my colleague said too, and I like to highlight that most of that people, they don't want to leave Africa because they wake up this morning and they said, I want to go to Europe. No, it's because as everyone in this world, we are all looking for a better life. So regarding this, I think that together, and if there's will on both sides, we need to have an holistic approach to this situation. I would not call it a problem, but situation. And what can we do? We need, we need to empower the communities there. We need to find the root causes of the problems, because it's not just giving money or building an hospital. Let's take the hospital for an example. We go to Lebanon or any other country and we say, okay, we are going to build you an hospital for you to get better conditions. But if they don't have know-how or resources to maintain and operate the hospital, we were just spending money, and the problem is still there. So we need to empower. It's not just giving money, it's going to the field. Of course, if both sides, both countries or both blocks want that. So this needs to be done with, as we say in Portugal, with foot and head. So we need to make this holistically. And then there's other thing. As a Portuguese, maybe I can have a different opinion from my colleagues from France, and it's still different from the Spanish or the Italians because they do receive a lot of migrants. But as a Portuguese and as a European, I'm proud of say that the European Union, for me, it's a lighthouse of a normative power. And of course we want to help. But we need to help. The same thing, we can't just wait that Italy and Spain, and Portugal it's not the same case, but we are close and we can share the same feelings in some of the things. We can just wait that Italy and Greece and Spain get all the people who come from to the European Union. They don't have the capacity to that. It's totally impossible. And that can produce really bad effects in the society. As my colleague said, and they can see that from the Italians. That's why then politics change. That's why public opinion got to the extreme sides, and I'm not talking specifically about the right or the left. And that's really upset because we are not facing the problem together, because we are a union and we cooperate with both sides, and we are not cooperating, or we are not having enough dialogue to solve this situation. And yes, it's people. We are people. It's not like we are, they are, as we said when we are talking about Israel and Hamas these days. They are terrorists and we are people. Or Israelis are people, Palestinians are people, the Hamas are terrorists. Okay, they are terrorists, it's fine. But at the end of the day, we are people, so we have to take care of each other. Not, well, the Israel situation is kind of different, but regarding the migration in the Mediterranean, I think we all want the same, a better life, so we need to cooperate in this. That's my...
Merci. Je vais rajouter un petit point.
I'm just going to add a little point, something which is changing today, which we didn't have 10 years back. We have representations on social networks. Someone who lives in Dakar, on the social networks, he will more easily be represented and can be proud of Senegalese culture, whereas 10 years ago that wasn't the case, and might have been more easily believing in some kind of distant El Dorado. I think we only have a few minutes left. We have tested this discussion format. We will take a final question from the room. Yes, we've got 2 minutes. So a final question to do with migration or with what we talked about earlier on. We're talking about social networks, something which really gets up my nerves. And there's so much hate on social networks. And that hate always goes hand in hand with cowardice. People hiding behind a pseudonym, they're anonymous. Just tell me yes or no, for all 5 people up there on the stage, if you would be favorable to banning anonymity on social networks. Yes, it's a good question. I would say no, I would not be in favor of banning anonymity on social networks, but the web police can find out who people are for harassment, for example, and bullying. There's been cases in the news recently in bullying cases, and everyone's going to kind of express their opinion, and that person will wake up one day and will all of a sudden see 50 people who feel that they've only did something. There was an event on YouTube in the United States. There was a YouTuber who studies astrophysics who had hate messages about raping her and killing her. She's a really clever girl, and she found out who was sending these hate messages, contacted the parents of the person making those messages, and the parents of the bullier was denying that it was the son in question. Yes, we don't have the same behavior online as we do in everyday, because in everyday life, we know people know who we are, we might be punished, and perhaps anonymity plays a role, but it's also tied in with the culture of the web. You can go and watch all kinds of videos and leave comments without being personally held responsible. It's to do with web culture. There are tools now to combat bullying. The interpreter cannot hear what is said without the microphone. You're talking about freedom of expression on the web. Yes, there is moderation. There are moderators. But the models are far from perfect. As a content creator, I can insert words that will never come out in the comments. There are little tools that you can use that content creators can use. Not all platforms use it, but it can. Whoops, bit of a message. This is announced saying that there's one last presentation in the main amphitheatre after this session closes. And if you have finished your time here, don't forget to hand in your translation headset. Yes, the tricky thing is, on the web you've got a whole layer cake of all kinds of things. You've got all kinds of tools to make sure that all hate messages will never be published. And it might work on YouTube, but then you shift to Twitter and you can say whatever you like. So the problem is each platform has to have its own set of tools. Some progress is being made, it is taking time, and it's not going as fast as the propagation of some hate messages. But I think the platforms come and see us more and more frequently saying, what do you need? What kind of tools do you want? And so we're making progress platform by platform. There is not a central governing platform that will manage everything for the entire web. It is very piecemeal. Thank you very much, everybody, for being here, for putting questions, and thank you to the panelists for answering.